The waiter stormed toward the table, his face twisted with irritation. "Hey, you! Are you lost or just killing time? We don't serve freebies here," he snapped, glaring at the man seated quietly in the corner. The restaurant buzzed with activity, yet it felt like all eyes turned toward the commotion. The man looked up slowly, his massive frame filling the chair like it was made for a child. His kind yet commanding eyes met the waiter's, and without raising his voice, he said, "I just wanted a menu before we dive deeper into what happens next. Take a moment to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the twists in this story or the inspiring lessons we bring every time." The waiter huffed, tossing a menu onto the table. "Don't waste my time, order something, or leave." Some diners gasped at the audacity, whispering among themselves. Did this guy seriously not recognize the 7-foot-tall man sitting in front of him? But the waiter seemed oblivious, or maybe he didn't care. Shaquille O'Neal, sitting there in jeans and a simple hoodie, didn't look like a billionaire or a global icon at first glance. He quietly opened the menu, scanning the options as if nothing had happened. The waiter rolled his eyes and walked away, muttering something under his breath. Meanwhile, a young boy at a nearby table tugged on his mom's sleeve. "Mom, is that Shaq?" The mother smiled nervously, whispering, "It sure looks like him, but why would he be here?" Others in the restaurant started stealing glances, some pulling out their phones discreetly to take pictures. But the waiter, too preoccupied with his self-importance, didn't notice the buzz building around him. Moments later, Shaq waved him over again, this time with a small smile. The waiter trudged back, clearly annoyed. "What now?" he said, exasperated. Shaq pointed to the dessert section. "This triple chocolate cake looks good. I'll take a slice, and maybe 2 burgers." The waiter scoffed. "Triple chocolate cake, sure, why not anything else, Mr. Big Spender?" His sarcasm dripped like venom. The tension in the air was thick now. Some diners whispered about leaving, others watched silently, and a few shook their heads at the waiter's behavior. Still, Shaq remained calm, his expression unreadable. What he said next made the entire room fall silent. "Actually, make it a double order. Everyone here gets dessert on me." The waiter froze. "Excuse me." Shaq leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You heard me. Whatever they're having, it's on me. Let's make tonight special for everyone." This time, the waiter couldn't hide his disbelief or his irritation. "You can't just say that," he snapped. "Do you even know what that costs?" Shaq smiled faintly, his eyes narrowing just enough to hint that the waiter might be in over his head. "Oh, I know exactly what it costs," he said, his voice steady. "Why don't you call your manager? I think we need to talk." The manager appeared moments later, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit who looked like he hadn't smiled in years. He strode toward the table, his expression somewhere between confused and annoyed. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, glancing from the waiter to Shaq. The waiter jumped in before Shaq could speak. "This guy is causing a scene," he said, folding his arms. "He's making ridiculous claims about buying dessert for the whole restaurant, probably doesn't even have the money to cover his own meal." A murmur rippled through the restaurant, and the manager's brow furrowed. He turned to Shaq, trying to remain professional. "Sir, I'm not sure what's going on here, but if you're unable to pay..." Shaq held up a hand, cutting him off politely but firmly. "Let me stop you right there," he said, his voice calm yet commanding. "There's no issue with payment. In fact, I'd like to settle the bill for everyone here tonight. Just let me know the total and I'll take care of it." The manager blinked, unsure of how to respond. He studied Shaq for a moment, and then it seemed to click. His eyes widened as recognition set in. "Wait a second, you're..." Before he could finish, Shaq reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a sleek black card, placing it on the table. "Now, how about we take care of these orders and let everyone enjoy their evening," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. The manager's jaw dropped, but the waiter still seemed oblivious. "Are you serious?" the waiter blurted. "You can't just..." "Enough," the manager interrupted, his voice sharp. He turned to the waiter, his tone laced with frustration. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? This man is Shaquille O'Neal." The waiter's face went pale, his eyes darting back to Shaq, who was now leaning back in his chair, watching the scene unfold with an almost amused expression. "Shaquille O'Neal, like the basketball player?" "Yes," the manager said through gritted teeth. "And he doesn't just play basketball. He's a businessman, a philanthropist, and by the way, he owns this restaurant." The waiter's jaw dropped. He stumbled over his words, trying to form a coherent sentence. I didn't know. I mean, I..." Shaq leaned forward, resting his massive hands on the table. "It's okay," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We all have bad days, but here's the thing: you never know who you're talking to. So maybe next time, treat everyone with a little more respect. Sound fair?" The waiter nodded, his face burning with embarrassment. "Yes, sir," he mumbled. Shaq's smile returned, warm and genuine. "Good. Now, let's get everyone their dessert." As the waiter scurried off, the manager turned to Shaq. "I'm so sorry about this, Mr. O'Neal. I'll make sure it never happens again." Shaq waved him off. "No harm done," he said. "Just take care of your team and your customers. That's what this business is all about." The manager nodded, his respect for Shaq evident as the rest of the staff hurried to fulfill Shaq's generous order. The diners erupted into applause. But as the night unfolded, something unexpected happened, something that would change the waiter's life forever. What lesson does the waiter learn, and how does Shaq's kindness create an unforgettable moment? Stay tuned for the next part. As the night carried on, the restaurant transformed into a scene of pure joy. Plates of desserts were brought out to every table, and the mood shifted from tense whispers to laughter and celebration. Families clinked their glasses, kids squealed over their sundaes, and even the grumpiest diners couldn't help but smile. The waiter, however, stayed in the back, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His hands trembled as he refilled drinks and cleared tables. His mind raced. He couldn't shake the humiliation. He had insulted one of the most famous and respected men in the world, and worse, he had responded with kindness. When the rush finally died down, Shaq called the manager over again. "Can you ask that waiter to come here? I'd like to talk to him." The manager hesitated, unsure of how the interaction would go, but he nodded and headed to the back. Moments later, the waiter emerged, his face pale and his head hanging low. He walked up to Shaq's table, avoiding eye contact. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Shaq motioned to the empty chair across from him. "Have a seat," he said, his tone gentle. The waiter hesitated, glancing at the manager, who gave him a small nod. Slowly, he sat down, fidgeting with the edge of his apron. "What's your name?" Shaq asked. "Ben," the waiter replied, barely above a whisper. "Well, Ben," Shaq said, leaning forward slightly. "Do you know why I asked to speak with you?" Ben shook his head, his voice cracking as he replied, "Probably to fire me, I guess." And I deserve it? Shaq let out a deep, warm chuckle. Fire, you know, man. That's not why I called you over. He paused, letting the silence settle before continuing. I wanted to talk because I've been where you are, angry, frustrated, struggling to get through the day. It's not easy, is it? Ben's eyes widened, the unexpected empathy catching him off guard. But you're Shaquille O'Neal. You've got everything. Shaq smiled faintly, shaking his head. What I have now didn't come easy. There were times I didn't know where my next meal was coming from. Times when I felt invisible, just like you probably feel sometimes. Ben swallowed hard, the lump in his throat growing. I didn't mean to act like that, he said, his voice breaking. I was having a bad day, and I took it out on you. I'm sorry. Shaq reached across the table, his massive hand resting lightly on Ben's shoulder. Apology accepted. But let me tell you something important. How you treat people even on your worst days says a lot about who you are. And you never know when someone might walk in who can change your life. Ben nodded, his eyes misty. I don't know how to thank you, he murmured. You don't have to thank me, Shaq said. Just pay it forward. Treat the next person you meet with kindness, no matter who they are. As Ben stood up to return to work, Shaq stopped him. One more thing, he said, pulling a crisp envelope from his pocket. Open this when you get home. Consider it a little encouragement. Ben stared at the envelope, unsure of what to say. Thank you, he whispered, clutching it tightly. Little did he know, the contents of that envelope would change his life in ways he never imagined. What's in the envelope, and how does it impact Ben's future? Stay tuned for the next twist. The night ended with Shaq quietly leaving the restaurant amidst cheers and applause from the customers. People took photos, exchanged smiles, and shared stories of the unforgettable encounter. But for Ben, the shift was far from over. His thoughts were consumed by the mysterious envelope Shaq had handed him. What could it possibly contain? A warning, a token of forgiveness, or something else entirely? When his shift ended, Ben rushed home. His tiny apartment was a stark contrast to the bustling restaurant, dimly lit and sparsely furnished. He sat at his worn-out kitchen table, staring at the envelope as if it held the answers to all his problems. With trembling hands, he tore it open. Inside was a handwritten note on elegant stationery. It read, Ben, I see potential in you, but potential needs a chance. Life has probably thrown you some curveballs, it does that to all of us. But your reaction to those challenges is what defines you. Inside this envelope you'll find something to help you take that next step. Use it wisely. Shaquille O'Neal. Beneath the note was a cashier's check for $10,000. Ben froze, his breath caught in his throat, and tears welled up in his eyes. 10,000, this couldn't be real. He flipped the check over, scrutinizing every detail, but it was genuine. For a moment, the weight of his struggle seemed to lift. This money could change everything. He could finally catch up on his rent, pay off his debts, and maybe even go back to school like he'd always dreamed. But as the initial shock wore off, a new thought crept in. Why me? Why would someone like Shaquille O'Neal do this for me? The following day, Ben showed up at work with newfound determination. He worked with a smile, greeted every customer warmly, and even helped his colleagues without complaint. The staff noticed the change, and so did the manager. At the end of the shift, the manager pulled Ben aside. I don't know what's gotten into you, he said, but this is the best version of you I've ever seen. Keep it up. Meanwhile, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to thank Shaq properly. But how do you thank someone for changing your life? The answer came to him that evening as he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the note. He decided he would pay it forward, just as Shaq had suggested. But how would he use the gift, and would he ever find a way to connect with Shaq again? The journey of gratitude and redemption continues in the next part. Ben couldn't sleep that night. The words in Shaq's note echoed in his mind, "Use it wisely." He felt a responsibility far greater than just paying his bills. The gift wasn't just about the money, it was about finding a way to transform his life and, in turn, help others. The next morning, with the check still safely tucked in his pocket, Ben called his landlord to settle his overdue rent. The relief in the landlord's voice was palpable, but Ben wasn't finished yet. He went to the local bank, cashed a portion of the check, and set aside the rest in his savings account. As he walked back home, an idea began to take shape in his mind. Ben thought about the countless people who walked into the restaurant every day, people struggling silently, much like he had been. What if he could make their days just a little brighter? Inspired, he decided to create a Pay It Forward fund, using a part of Shaq's money to surprise people with acts of kindness. His first act of kindness came the very next day during his shift. He noticed a young single mother nervously counting coins at her table, trying to decide if she could afford dessert for her 2 kids. Ben approached her with a warm smile. "It's on the house," he said, sliding a slice of pie to each child. The mother looked up, startled. "But I didn't order." "It's just a little treat," Ben said, his voice kind but firm. "Enjoy." The look of gratitude in her eyes was enough to convince him that he was on the right path. News of Ben's generosity began to spread among the regulars. Customers started leaving bigger tips, often with notes that read, "For the next person in need." Slowly, the energy in the restaurant began to change. It became more than a place to eat, it became a hub of hope and kindness. But Ben still hadn't reached out to Shaq. He wanted to wait until he had something more substantial to show for himself. Then one day, an unexpected opportunity presented itself. During a busy evening shift, the restaurant manager pulled Ben aside and handed him a flyer. "Guess who's coming back?" the manager said with a grin. Ben's heart skipped a beat as he read the words, "Special guest appearance, Shaquille O'Neal. Live Q&A and dinner." The event was scheduled for the following week. It wasn't just a visit, it was a community event with proceeds going to local charities. For Ben, it was the perfect chance to express his gratitude. How will Ben's journey come full circle when he meets Shaq again, and what unexpected twist awaits at the event? Stay tuned for the final chapter. The evening of the event arrived, and the restaurant was alive with excitement. Cameras flashed, conversations buzzed, and the air was electric with anticipation. Shaquille O'Neal walked in, towering over the crowd, his warm smile lighting up the room. He greeted everyone like old friends, shaking hands, cracking jokes, and posing for photos. Ben stood near the kitchen door, nervously adjusting his apron. He wasn't sure how to approach Shaq, but he knew this was his moment. Clutching a small envelope, he rehearsed what he wanted to say in his head. As Shaq finished the Q&A session and prepared to leave, Ben seized his chance. He walked over, his heart pounding. "Excuse me, Mr. O'Neal," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Shaq turned, recognizing him immediately. "Ben," he said, grinning. "How's my favorite waiter?" The warmth in Shaq's voice calmed Ben's nerves. "I've been better," Ben said with a nervous chuckle. "But also, thanks to you, I've been much better." Shaq gestured for Ben to sit with him at a nearby table. "Tell me about it," he said, leaning in with genuine interest. Ben took a deep breath and told Shaq everything, the impact of the money, his decision to pay it forward, and how the restaurant had become a place of kindness and community. He spoke about the young mother, the generous customers, and the ripple effect that Shaq's gift had created. When Ben finished, he slid the envelope across the table. "This isn't much," he said, "but it's something I wanted to give back." Shaq opened the envelope and found a donation receipt for a local youth mentorship program, along with a heartfelt note from Ben. Shaq's eyes softened. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "But I did," Ben replied. "You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. This is my way of saying thank you and keeping the cycle going." Shaq sat back, a thoughtful smile spreading across his face. "You know, Ben, the world needs more people like you. People who don't just take second chances, but turn them into something bigger." The room filled with guests who had been quietly watching the exchange. The crowd erupted into applause. Ben, overwhelmed, felt a wave of emotion wash over him. As Shaq prepared to leave, he shook Ben's hand firmly and said, "Keep doing what you're doing. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." But before walking out, Shaq paused, turned back, and addressed the entire restaurant. "This guy right here," he said, pointing to Ben, "is proof that a little kindness can go a long way. Let's all try to do the same every chance we get." The crowd cheered, and as Shaq exited, Ben stood there, tears streaming down his face, realizing he not only changed his own life but had also inspired an entire community. From that day on, the restaurant wasn't just known for its food, it became a symbol of hope, kindness, and the incredible power of second chances.